Hello and welcome to this week's Preps Preview. I'm Herald and Review sports writer Justin Conn. This is Scott Richey. I thought last week was probably as eventful a week as we've had this season, and maybe even in the last couple of seasons, as far as just big wins and statement wins and things that have happened. So kind of an exciting week leading into maybe not such an exciting week. But first of all, we'll talk about last week. Scott, what I guess was, if you had to pick one thing that really stood out to you last week, if one game, which one was it?
I mean, I guess I'd have to go with Meridian just beating the pants off of Clinton. I mean, kind of figured that was their chance to start turning things around. The Hawks, under Scott Davis, is because Clinton has had some similar struggles the last few years, but just a complete and utter blowout. I don't know if anyone saw that coming. It doesn't get easy for Meridian. They play Maroa this week, who will probably not lose the whole season, but it's a step. They won a game, first time in 30 plus, and they scored 53 points doing it. So that kind of stuck out.
That's close to what they scored all of last season, within 30 points of what they scored all of last season, and then the season before they only scored in the 80s as well. So yeah, they definitely, there's no other way to look at that as a huge step forward, even if it's against a struggling Clinton team. But a Clinton team that has probably a few more upperclassmen and a few more returning players from the previous year than they had. So yeah, that's definitely a huge win for them. It was tough for me to pick this one. Just because I thought Sullivan's win was big after they had played so poorly the first few weeks, and I know we had talked about them in here a little bit before, just how disappointing they'd been, and they really righted the ship against A&M last week, and all of a sudden A&M's kind of looking like they're headed the other direction a little bit. So that was a big one, but I'm going to still go with Maroa's win against Tolono Unity. In a number one against 2A, number 1 and 2A against the number 1 and 3A game, you just don't expect it to be anything but a tightly played game. I thought Maroa was the better team and that they would win by a couple touchdowns, and control the game. But to have it, to just completely dominate it, it'd be 40, midway through the third quarter where both team starters are out of the game. Unity was saying basically, hey, you got this one, let's take our starters out and put our bench in and get ready for next week. It was happening quick, and it was just one of those games where it was eye-popping how good Maroa was, how efficient they were on offense, how brutal they were on defense, really saying, hey, Unity beat us with the pass, which is something that a lot of teams go into the game wanting to do against Unity because they're not a great passing team, but few accomplish that, and I think that has been the goal in past years. Weather helped, obviously. Last year it was raining, and that played in Unity's favor. This year, with a nice night, just an unbelievable performance from Jack Hockaday and the defense and that group of receivers, and Josh Ratz, who has really all of a sudden emerged this year as a huge threat for them, which I know the rest of the teams in their conference were like, oh great, another threat now. So that was really what stood out. And like you said earlier, it's hard to picture Maroa losing at least until the state championship game. Obviously they'll get a good team there. Yeah. Maybe Mercer County, who won 2A last year, looks good again this year. But right now, I think whoever they play, they'll be a heavy favorite against them. They're just loaded right now.
Yeah, and I thought Maroa was going to have to win ugly against Unity just because that's the way those games have been the last couple of years. And they sort of did, but it was just ugly for Unity. So
we're going to kind of shift gears here a little bit and talk about some Player of the Year candidates. Not quite mid-season, but we're 4 weeks in, and things have, some creams rose to the top at least. I think in the county, it's a pretty similar conversation to what we had last year. And in the area, right now, there's somebody out there who might not even be on either of our lists that ends up winning this thing. It's really, nobody's kind of stepped up and taken the ring on that one yet. So we'll throw out some names here. I'll start it out here. In the county race, last year it came down to Jack Hockaday and Steve Isbell from Maroa and Steve Isbell from Cerro Gordo, and right now those are the two players that are playing the best in the county again, it seems like.
Yeah, they were the first two names I wrote down, and then I was like, well, I can fill out the list a little more, even though I probably don't think anyone's going to kind of usurp that top two spots. But some other names, and really it's a lot of running backs. It's kind of what teams in the county do, outside of Hockaday, who's the lone quarterback who just throws really well and all the time. But Chris Isom, Santa Teresa, Austin Ray, and Mount Zion's not having the year that he's had the last 2 years, but he's still putting up some pretty decent numbers, and you have to think that Mount Zion's going to lean on him, to start picking up some wins a little more. And then out of Argenta, Cameron Hupp missed, last week, but he's had a great season. And then Austin Wins-Kunis, rushed for almost 300 yards in his place, so he probably gets his name in consideration too.
I think with Hockaday and Isbell, last year I thought at the end of the regular season I was sort of leaning toward Isbell as the guy that could win it, and then once Hockaday had that unbelievable postseason and that really great performance in the state championship game, I thought that gave him the lean. And some people will say that's a little unfair for the team that has the postseason run to get it, but those are the games you play, and that's what's in front of you at the end of the season. And it sort of looks like Cerro Gordo and Maroa could end up facing each other at some point in the postseason. So, Maroa is obviously the heavy favorite in that one. So, you got to kind of lean towards Hockaday again if that kind of plays out again to where Maroa ends up playing more games and kind of gives you more looks at Hockaday. But Isbell, right when you're like, okay, this is who this guy is, he steps up and does like 5 other things. Like last week, he stole the ball out of a guy's hands and returned it for a touchdown. If he's going to do that, that's just not fair.
I mean, he had 5 touchdowns last week against Georgetown Ridge Farm. He rushed for 2, which is his usual thing. He had a huge touchdown reception from Cole Blickensdorfer. He picked off a pass and took it all the way for a touchdown, and he just hijacked the ball from a Ridge Farm kid and went. I think that was 60 yards. Most of his scores were pretty lengthy. The fumble return, I think it was 80 something. The touchdown pass was 70. He is a highlight reel just every week.
Yeah, he makes it entertaining. No question about it. In the area, let's hear your thoughts in the area, Scott. Because I can't even really limit it to 1 or 2 guys at all in this one. I think I have 6 names down here, and I'm just not sure.
And I've got, I believe, 7 names, maybe 8, and it might not be any of them. But to start, I have Jared Pilson, quarterback at Mattoon. I mean, he had a clunker against Highland. The Green Wave did as a team. They got shut out and gave up 50+. But he's been pretty solid. Every other week. Besides that, throwing the ball really well. And to his main target so far has been Malik Joyner, who's one of the leading receivers in the area. So I mean, just kind of those two kind of go together and will make a case for each other. Austin Chauncey at Nokomis. He was running the ball really well again. Robinson now maybe has 2 running backs, and Jason Richard and Joe Smith that they're both capable of 100-yard games. Miles Decker, running back at Charleston, more so just because he is their offense. I mean, he has 98 carries through 4 weeks. Week 1 set the school record with 41 carries. Week 2 matched it. Last week he had 39. So, I mean, they're giving him the ball, so he's going to have an opportunity to put up some huge numbers. Charleston as a team, definitely down from last year. And then a couple defensive guys. I was just thinking, there's no offensive player really standing out. Logan West from Arthur Levington, Atwood Hammond. I got to see him in person. He's pretty imposing at linebacker and gets in on a lot of plays. Clay Becker at Monticello is kind of one of those guys for the Sages that leads that nasty defense.
I definitely agree with all those guys. The only 2 guys I really had written down that you didn't mention were Nico Stepina from KZ. Hasn't put up huge numbers so far. Hasn't had to just because their schedule's so bad, and he's out of the game a lot of times by the second half. So I think that you'll see in big games he'll start putting up some big numbers, and I think he could be a guy who in the second half of the season starts making a run at that. Another guy, and this is definitely a dark horse, but Nick Bates from Tuscola. He's a sophomore quarterback, and he's putting up some nice numbers. They don't get in the end zone probably enough to put him up there, but if they start doing that, I mean, he passes the ball a lot. They're really throwing the ball around a lot at Tuscola, and Bates definitely, and if not this year, he's going to be a guy that goes in next year as a candidate. So he's put himself in the running. You mentioned Pilsen, and you also mentioned Ray in the county race. I think now that those 2 teams are out of their non-conference schedule, which included some pretty tough opponents, and now they're getting to the Apollo schedule, you can start seeing those 2 guys put up some impressive numbers against some teams that aren't real strong in the rest of the Apollo. So I think those 2 guys will at least make moves in this race going forward for sure. Kind of leading us into this week a little bit, it's not necessarily a great week of matchups. It looks like a lot of lopsided matchups and a lot of matchups, between teams that aren't necessarily at the top of the ladder right now. So, I don't know. As far as games we're looking forward to this weekend, definitely on Saturday, over in the Little Illini, we have Olney and Robinson. I think is probably the best game of the week. Two really different styles, with Olney being a team that likes to throw it around, and Robinson a ground and pound type team. So it's a nice matchup, and definitely going to be important not only in the race in the conference, but for playoff positioning and things like that as well.
Yeah, because whoever but the winner of that game is going to probably win that division of the Little Illini. But just to maybe momentum, just having a better feeling about the season. You beat a team like Olney if you're Robinson. You beat a team like Robinson if you're Olney. It's a good push at the midway point of the season to finish things strong.
Another game kind of looking at this week, Mount Zion goes to Paris. So obviously that's a long trip for anybody who wants to see that game. But I think that's going to be the Braves' first win of the season. I'm pretty certain about that. And I think Mount Zion can win out. I think they can win these last 5 games and go to the playoffs. Effingham and Charleston are on that list as well, but I don't think there's anybody on that schedule where I go, oh boy, they're in trouble in that one. They have some wins ahead of them. Whether it's 5 or not, we'll see, but I think this is the start for them.
But if they don't get it figured out against Paris, it could go the other way. Paris, won his first 2 games, but didn't, really play anyone. Week 3, they played Clifton Central, who was ranked and got beat by 60 something. They lost to Salem last week, and to start the Apollo. Salem has not been good in the Apollo for 3 or 4 years now. So really, it's Mount Zion needs to go into that game and win kind of in a big way. And I think defensively is where they need to show that.
No question. One other game in the Oak Hall this week, probably the best of sort of a week lot of games, is Central A&M and Argenta. Argenta was a team that we didn't talk about in what stood out last week, but I thought winning without Gage Eller and Cameron Hupp against a really good St. Teresa team was sort of a statement where they're not going to lay down just because Eller's out, and they're ready to put that Monticello loss from week 2 behind them. They had beaten Shelbyville the next week, but this is a win against a good team in St. Teresa, so definitely like that win and like where they're going. A&M needs to really bounce back. That's a bad loss to Sullivan, and they had lost to St. Teresa the week before in a game where not necessarily a bad loss, but the way they played was disturbing. So, they're going to have a lot to prove against Argenta. So, it looks on paper like an easy Argenta win, but maybe Argenta has a letdown in the second week without Eller, second week of 4 weeks without Gage at quarterback, and then maybe A&M finds something to hang their hat on in this one, because right now they're looking like a team that's not going to make the playoffs this year, and maybe they lose a lot after this year too. So they may be hitting kind of a bad run here if they can't kind of find some things with some younger guys and help turn this thing around. So again, not necessarily the most glamorous matchups this week, but we'll still have all the coverage and definitely be on Pick'em. I'm making a nice little move on Pick'em here. I know Aaron Dow had talked a lot of trash early, and we'll see if he can make a comeback after slipping here in the last couple of weeks. And of course, HR Prep's on Twitter and Facebook and on the website and in print as well. So we'll see you out at the games.